Good evening, everyone. I'm going to be reading a passage from Schelling's On University Studies, which was a lecture course that he gave, I think, in Munich. And this lecture course, I had trouble already finding a copy of the book. It's an used library copy. I would encourage everyone to get a copy of the book, which is now very difficult to get as far as I can tell. Especially, I haven't been able to find an edition in German. There should be some out there still on some of the used book stores online where you can get a copy. I think it's really a magnificent work for anyone who's interested in the future of education and especially in the future of philosophy and the humanities. And then I will say a few things on, well, what learning is, but also on how to study philosophy online, as this is perhaps where it is currently moving. So, on university studies, Schelling says the following in the lecture entitled Prerequisites to University Studies. Ready-made knowledge can only be memorized. Knowledge is not truly our own until we are capable of reproducing the given content in a form of our own making. Memorizing is but a negative condition. True, organic assimilation is impossible without inner transformation of what we learn. All rules for study are summed up in this one. Learn only in order to create. Only by his divine capacity for production is man truly man. Without it, no more than a tolerably well-devised machine. He who has not, with the same high impulse as the artist, who out of the raw material calls forth the image of his soul, his own invention, who has not fashioned the image of his science in all its parts and features in perfect harmony with the archetype, has not truly grasped it. All creation is the result, Schelling continues, of a meeting between the universal and the particular, an interpenetration of one and the other, of hen kai pan, of one and the many in diversity, which is what the place, which is, why do we call it a university? Maybe you may have asked yourself this. I'm quite certain that people inside the university never ask themselves why this institution is called a university. What is it that a university stands for? I would like to continue with one more passage from Schelling, from the same lecture on the prerequisites to university studies. Nothing forms the intellect so effectively as learning to recognize the living spirit of a language dead to us. To be able to do this is no whit different from what the natural philosopher does when he addresses himself to nature. Nature is like some very ancient author whose message is written in hieroglyphics on colossal pages, as the artist says in Goethe's poem. So, let me now say a few words perhaps on studying philosophy online, or studying philosophy in general. There is, on the one hand, there's this abundance of just so-called information and data out there, which depicts a bad infinite. They can click from one video to the next, from one podcast to the next, from one instant to the next instant, with an absolute, a bad infinite with Hegel. There's no bottom to it. There's no point to it. On the other hand, there is, of course, a danger of wanting ready-made knowledge, of wanting to be a superficial master of, say, Nietzsche or Hegel or even Schelling or Kant by glancing over some of the ready-made quick summaries of thinkers, and then you can read these absurd articles, for example, on Wikipedia on, oh, by the eternal recurrence of the same, Nietzsche means this, that, and the other, and it's neatly formatted into something completely benign and almost irrelevant, and well, then you haven't really entered into what philosophy demands of us, which is to begin to think. There is no method, as it were, of philosophy. It is with any philosopher, you will be on the path to thinking itself, and it is only ever in the thinking and thinking through that you begin to explicate the method. The method is not, as it were, a priori given and can then be applied to any situation. There's much talk now, of course, about leaving the institutions behind and being radically free from it. But what's so stifling about teaching inside academia, at least in my experience, is that one has to give learning outcomes. So that means ready-made knowledge, to quote again from Schelling. That means that in any given seminar or lecture, you must present before you begin the learning outcome. And that means that you must present a product, a service, which then guarantees the student that he or she will walk away from the seminar knowing exactly what Kant meant with transcendental idealism. And then you can memorize the bullet point from the PowerPoint slide and think that you have begun to understood. And if we copy this, if we transfer this over to this supposedly radically free, non-institutional way of learning by claiming that we offer courses which let you master a certain thinker in 2 or 3 weeks, then we're lying. That would be a lie. And it's, I think, quite the opposite with my courses. You would probably walk away being, well, not confused, but hopefully dislodged. Or certainly a bit, perhaps in a good way, more confused, more weirded out, but on some level, brought towards the genuine need that is philosophy. And that's something that's lost. I've talked about this a couple of times behind the scenes, but what is it that philosophy is? Why does anyone read philosophy or want to read philosophy or even something like that's surrounding philosophy? Well, because philosophy is a genuine human need, like food, a need, not a want in economic terms, not a desire, a need. A need in this fundamental sense that without it, we will die. That's philosophy. That's why people come to study or read philosophers. Not because they, maybe because they, some it might be for certain reasons then after a certain while, but it is a need. At the same time, as I've mentioned before, it is a dangerous fire that can burn one. And it is often, I find, the most enthusiastic in the beginning who lose patience very quickly and then disappear again into the cloak of night. But it's important, it's fundamental, if this is a serious endeavor, this moving out of the institutions, etc., is not to copy, is not to follow the same ready-made knowledge, to quote Schelling again, which is to be memorized, but to invite students or participants to begin to think through the philosophers that we consider, yes, but to begin to think through them and to move into a place where this need of philosophy is becoming not just something that's being fed or being soothed with more and more content, but begins to be transformed into a genuine ethos. And the old Greek word ethos, far from meaning just something benignly as character, means dwelling ground. So that philosophy itself becomes the dwelling ground of the human being, which is what the university should provide, which it fails to provide. And it fails to provide because it has lost its senses, it has lost its, even just any systematic approach to philosophy. And by the way, you have to begin with the Greeks. One has to begin with the Greeks. And it has to begin almost chronologically with the early Greek philosophers, then moving into Plato and Aristotle, forward to, I would say, Thomas Aquinas, St. Augustine before, the early modern philosophers, Descartes, the British empiricists, Leibniz, Malebranche before, and then Kant and German Idealism. So that if there is a self-directed study that you undertake, it must go, I think, absolutely in this chronological way. You must have some grounding in the ancient Greeks to understand what Hegel is after, to understand what Kant is doing, to understand what Heidegger is doing. You know, if you come to Heidegger without knowing anything of Parmenides or Plato, there's no point reading Heidegger. Absolutely not. It has to do, as I mentioned, also to uphold the dead, so-called dead languages, Greek and Latin. Absolutely fundamental to have. One doesn't need to be able to speak them or read them perfectly. That's not very likely to be attainable for most people. But one should have some grounding, some understanding for the Greek language, for how the Romans translate the Greek into Latin, and also how the scholastics translate Aristotle. It must, I think, if anything, if this is going anywhere, then it must break entirely free. I mean, the non-institutional or extra-institutional philosophy, or whatever you want to call this philosophy. It's not really a department, is it? But endeavors on where to study philosophy, etc. Then it must break free from how philosophy has been, I think, mistaught in these completely irrational, non-systematic ways without any decent, sound grounding, where people have, go away with from a philosophy degree not knowing what some of the most, what logos is. I've seen ancient Greek seminars where logos was never even, not once mentioned. And so I think if you want to study in a self-directed way, begin chronologically. Read some of the fundamental texts yourself. Read the poem by Parmenides. Then read the fragments by Heraclitus. Read Plato's Republic. Read Plato's Meno. Read the Apology of Socrates. And then these are not easy, but they're readable. With Aristotle, it's perhaps a bit more difficult. Probably and only a self-directed study will be quite hard. But one has to take it, I think, very seriously. How we approach this tradition and how to make it our own. Today, I would say with Aristotle, it's probably a good idea to have read De Anima or Perites Psyches, so on the soul, the Nicomachean Ethics, and I would even say the Metaphysics before the Physics, for reasons I won't get into here. And I would recommend then a big leap ahead, into the early modern times. One must have read Descartes' Meditations, maybe even the Principles, certainly Leibniz's Monadology, and the British empiricists, crucial, then Kant, and the rest of German idealism, in order to understand what it is that Heidegger, for example, responds to. And I think this already shows anyone who's listening, that this means serious work. And it isn't done with a couple of 10-minute summary videos. Quite the opposite. That probably is more destructive than taking it seriously. So if for some reason you are drawn to philosophy, you have to take that seriously, that it is serious work. It will be difficult. It will be very, very disillusioning and frustrating, because guess what? They're not talking about what you expect them to talk about. And the language is difficult, not because they want to be difficult, because what's at stake to articulate actuality, what is, has never been easy, and will never be easy, thank goodness. And ultimately, what you will need is you will have to find your peers, and this can be either by you self-organizing or by joining one of these many online forums that now exist. But you have to go where the tune that you are listening to, where this is present. So it generates, if there so at some point you will need to find the right people or peers to be in touch with and discuss the text that you're reading. And ultimately you will have to start writing, and you will have to start maybe also presenting a talk, and even a short talk, at a conference. What is a conference? Conferre, Latin, means what? To bring together. To let something come together, which is what a conference should be, for the sake of which, not for networking, but for the sake of, für die Sache, yeah, for the issue, for the matter at hand, which is then at stake. And there is always something at stake in philosophy, something fundamental, which is sozusagen phenomena, which means to safeguard phenomena. The conversation earlier today, where someone then pointed out to me that it is what Goethe calls the Urphänomene, the original, the primordial phenomena. That's what being in time Heidegger is after, to safeguard, to secure the primordial phenomena, so that the world continues to make sense. Philosophy isn't just some random theoretical exercise by some weirdos. Philosophy is the access to the world. That's what philosophy articulates and provides, if it knows what it's doing. So there's much talk about the meaning crisis, etc., etc., without securing phenomena so that they speak to us and disclose the world, which is the task of philosophy. All is idle. Is idle talk, is empty. It's going to be extremely vacuous, and it's going to be, as Hegel says, for philosophy shouldn't be, it should not be edifying. It isn't edifying. You don't read philosophy because it makes you feel something. No, you read philosophy because it is the extended memory of what it means to be human, and it is the extended memory of how we access the world. If we lose this, well, then we're trapped inside the machine. Read The Machine Stops by E.M. Foster if you want to know what kind of a world is in store for us without securing, safeguarding, safekeeping, maintaining the phenomena of the world. The fundamental phenomena: death, finitude, birth, life, existence, guilt, being with others, to speak with Heidegger. And ready-made knowledge is the death of this. Ready-made PowerPoint knowledge, which is why it's not just frustrating that you have to use PowerPoint. It's actually an assault on human spirit to use PowerPoint in philosophy in philosophy, because it's the death of thinking. So, learn only in order to create, Schelling. And this was a lecture course that Schelling gave. A lecture course on university studies. And we have to wonder why the universities no longer do this, why they don't self-reflect, and why there's just an operation that keeps on going for no reason. And once you ask the question, this interruption is going to cause some confusion. So, all rule for studies, as Schelling says, summed up in this one: learn only in order to create. Not ready-made knowledge, not something that's just lying around like vegetables or fruit on a table, as Hegel says, or as Heidegger also says about the Seinsgeschichte, which is completely mistranslated as the history of being. And at some point, you will need to be present with others who are like-minded peers, which is what Wilhelm von Humboldt says about what's most important about the university, is that you find like-minded peers within it. As he says, taking seminars is a minor matter. The healthy loneliness. And this is a Prussian bureaucrat who says this 200 years ago, where the university, where they still knew that what's at stake is fulfilling within oneself the cosmic law, truth. Say this now and they call you insane. So, if we do this outside the institutions, then we must lose the fake, dead language of it that promises any outcomes. There are no outcomes. There's just a path, and it's not trodden yet, and it's your path to take. It's not about being edifying. That's for self-help or any other gurus. There are no gurus in philosophy. There mustn't be. But it is a genuine need nonetheless. And this need needs to be considered just like the need to eat, to drink, and to have shelter, because it is only if we heed this need also that we find the ethos, the dwelling ground, upon which we can build a world that is human. So thank you very much indeed, and I'll say it again because it's so beautiful. Learn only in order to create. See you very soon.